r/AskReddit posted by user/Croker4Loca. What is the most unexplained, supernatural, or paranormal event you've ever witnessed? Was spending the night at a friend's house as a kid, around 12 to 13. Parents weren't home, so we decided to go out, do some ding-dong ditching, get into some young angsty debauchery. We get home, and it's around 1 or 2 in the morning. Cue a ringing of the doorbell. Naturally we think it's the cops or a pissed off neighbor. My friend had a small window that looked out onto the front porch that you couldn't really see into from outside, so we took a peek at who was calling at such a late hour. Standing at the door was an old woman in a dress and a young boy in a weird newsy outfit. Both were dressed extra melly out of period, as this was the 90s, and my friend had never seen either in the neighborhood before. We duck because we're a bit freaked. Look again no less than 10 seconds later, and they're both gone. Nobody on the street walking away, no cars driving away, they were just gone without a trace. We did not sleep well. You couldn't see them leaving cause they never did. Well, Monday I started to worry about my grandpa. The moment of worry passed, and I went about my day. Later on I posted an article about automated lawn mowers, saying that my grandpa would love this, since taking care of his yard was his hobby. Literally right after I hit share, my dad calls me. We all know this feeling. It's that drop in your stomach when you know something terrible has happened, or it's about to. The feeling that your world has changed, and there's nothing you can do. Anyways, he tells me that my grandpa was rushed to the hospital with a bladder infection, followed by several heart attacks, but he's still alive. I didn't think anything about worrying earlier, at least until I woke up the next morning. My dream that night was what made it click in my head, I guess. In the dream I was sitting in my grandpa's shed watching something, and he sits down next to me. Without any pretense he starts talking. The next few weeks are gonna be hard, and they will test you. Don't worry about me. In a few hours I won't have any use for it. We ended up spending what seemed like hours talking about a lot of personal things I honestly didn't know or didn't remember about my grandpa, most of which my dad and his brother have confirmed to be true, although a little exaggerated apparently. Grandpa didn't die until around noon on Tuesday, pretty much just a few hours, 3-hour time difference, after my dream. I'm not religious, nor will I be, but for fuck's sake, what the fuck? I know the subconscious mind can do things like this, but some of the details he told me about his life are things I wasn't there for, or even alive for. When I was around 6 or 7 we had a cat that had kittens. We knew it had kittens because it was pregnant, and then it wasn't anymore. The problem was that we had no idea where the kittens were. I was wondering about it, and looked right at the cat and sort of thought in my mind, where are your kittens? But without using words, if that makes any sense. Immediately the location came into my mind. It was through some broken boards just above our porch that our cat could jump into from pillars on the side of the porch. I knew that they were there. I walked straight over there, climbed onto the stone pillar, and looked through the hole in the boards. The kittens were right there. I've never had a similar experience again in my life. I was annoyed with my daughter because she hadn't cleaned her room in weeks, so when I walked by her room and saw her standing there, I assumed she was doing what I said. A few minutes later, she walked out of the shower in the bathroom with a towel wrapped around her and asked why I was looking at her strangely. When I asked her who was in her room, she looked scared too. I never figured out who that was, but they didn't clean up the room either. Such a mom response. Saw a ghost, still mad no one cleaned the room. I'm late to this thread, but reading some of these has compelled me to post. This isn't my story but my mom's. She is an extremely rational person, but this event caused her to have such severe panic attacks that she had to return and live with her parents for 6 months. All of this happened a few years before I was born. My mom's first husband was a Navy pilot during the Gulf War. The carrier was about 10 days into its cruise and operating with complete radio silence. She hadn't heard anything from the ship since it left, but that was to be expected. This was a war. On that night about 10 days into the cruise my mom woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. She saw her husband standing in the room. It wasn't an ethereal form either. He appeared solid and utterly the same. The only thing different about him was that his head was shaved. He only had one thing to say, goodbye. This whole experience startled my mom and she couldn't get back to sleep. She went to the kitchen to get some water when the doorbell rang. All military wives know what the late night doorbell means. Her husband had suffered a massive heart attack and died aboard the carrier. She was grief-ridden, but reasoned that the apparition had been a hallucination born of the stress of having a spouse deployed. Besides, with his head shaved, he didn't even look that familiar. Her mother and mother-in-law flew out immediately to plan for the funeral and receive the body. She stayed strong until the first viewing of the body. Her lifeless husband was bald. In a letter from his NFO, the shaved head was explained as the result of a lost bet. There had been no way of knowing that his head had been shaved, and my mom suffered a minor mental break. My dad died in a house fire in 1991. I was home at the time, on the other side of the house from him. He was sleeping at the time when I tried to wake him to get him out of the house by breaking a window and trying to jump into his room. I heard him say something, but I don't know what. I never told anyone in the family that he woke up, and the firefighters / doctors or whoever, I really don't remember, said he never did wake up. He didn't die immediately. It was 3 days later, of smoke inhalation. A few days after he died, my sister told me she had a dream where he wanted her to let me know that he was telling me to get away from the house. I've still never told her he woke up. Edit to answer the questions asked. Some details re/u/pm me your marks is a mess questions. The part of the house where I was a converted garage, and I was goofing around on a new Super Nintendo I had just gotten, so I didn't notice anything for a while, until it had started to get out of hand. Also, no fire alarms. When I heard the noise of the fire, I had no idea what it was, and opened the door from the family room, former garage, into the kitchen, and there was fire everywhere. So first I made sure to get my grandmother, her dog, and my friend out. As an aside, and this is where things get absurd, a friend was visiting to play the fancy new Super Nintendo. He had also recently broken his leg in a motorcycle accident, so he had to hop across the lawn when he left. After I got them out, as I remember it, I tried going around the back from the garage to the porch to get in the dining room. No good. Fire/smoke. Then further down the porch to get in the bathroom. Couldn't reach that window. Then I went back around to the front door. Lock we never used it, always went in and out through the converted garage. Then finally to my dad's room, where I tried to jump in and got myself knocked back by the smoke. I believe I yelled first, waking him up. 2. This leads to 2. He wouldn't have had his door locked, but would have had it closed. But then when I woke him, I suppose he tried to go out of his room, which is why there would have been smoke knocking me back out the window. And he was a deep sleeper, so I can imagine he was already confused before he opened the door to the hall, letting in the smoke/heat. And then to /u/blinger Douchus follow up. I was already 20 at the time, back on winter break from college, so his child, but not a child, if you see what I mean. And unfortunately, yes, it's true these days, 20 plus years on, most of the shock, anger, and all that stuff has faded. Mostly what gets me upset now is when I sit back and think about how much I would have wanted him to meet my children, and they him. My girlfriend and I were visiting my sister, who lived in a 200-year-old home in Western MA that used to be a brothel. We were staying in her guest room, which recently had new carpet installed that was rather tall and stiff. This made it quite difficult to open and shut the door. I recall using my body weight to force it shut and needing to yank it open. As I'm trying to fall asleep, I hear something bump the door from the hallway. I assume this is my sister, her boyfriend, or their dog. A few minutes later I hear something at the door again, but this time the knob turns. I freeze as I see the knob slowly turn, and the door begin to open, until I see a shape resembling the silhouette of a young girl. The only child in the house is an infant. I immediately roll over onto my side, close my eyes, and attempt to convince myself that what I saw was the silhouette of the dog. I don't mention this to my girlfriend or my sister, because I don't want to alarm anyone. Fast forward a few months, my girlfriend and I are returning to Western MA to attend my sister's wedding, and we will be staying in the same room. On the plane my girlfriend says, I have something I feel I should tell you about your sister's house. I immediately know where she's going with this. As it turns out, she was awake when the door opened, but she got a better look than I. She describes seeing a girl of about 5 or 6 wearing a Victorian-styled nightgown open the door and stare her in the eyes with a penetrating intensity before my girlfriend looked away. I tell her my story and we decide to make sure we drink enough to pass out every night, so we won't be awake if we are visited. Not me but my twin brother. We were around 6 years old and in Central Australia with our dad and older brother. We were doing some nature walk and he fell back a bit. He then screams and runs and catches up. He told my dad he had seen something. Later that day we were in the town nearby and my twin pointed at a painting in an art gallery and said that the figure in it was what he had seen. My dad went into the gallery and asked the person at the counter what the figure in the painting was, and they said it is an aboriginal spirit that takes children who wander too far from the camp or family. I was watching my parents' dog while they were out of town. My sister passed away in their house about a year prior. While I was there, I witnessed a picture of her fall off the wall. Then I discovered that every picture of her in the house had fallen off the wall, seemingly at the same time. They didn't keep many pictures up in general, so it was only 4 different pictures. I chalked it up to something shaking the house, even though we live in Ohio, and I felt nothing. I went home to my apartment. Face up on my desk was a picture of my sister and me that I knew I had packed away. I don't believe in things like this, but this occurred at a time where I was still very much actively grieving the loss of my sister and it hit me hard. Still can't explain it. When I was young, probably around 8 to 10, I caught chickenpox. I woke up in the middle of the night one night and called for my mom because little kids can't do shit for themselves when they are sick. A woman came into my bedroom and sat on my bed and stroked my hair until I fell asleep. For whatever reason, I thought it was my grandmother, but she was dressed funny. When I woke up the next morning, I went downstairs for breakfast and asked where my grandma was, and, naturally, my mom told me that she was at her house, like she always was. I told my mom she'd been in my room the night before, and my mom laughed and said that I'd just been dreaming. However, my aunt, who tended to believe that sort of thing more, was babysitting me that day. The upside to chickenpox meant there was no school for me, and I told her the story. She asked me to describe the weird outfit, and it was a nurse's outfit from the 50s/early 60s. My family knew the previous owners of the house. The wife was a nurse in the 50s and had died a few months previously. Can I say with 100% certainty that I had an encounter with a spirit? No. But it's certainly a spooky coincidence. I have a lot of stories, but I'll go with my favorite. My grandpa, who was a tough as nails WWII Marine vet, had a little stuffed bunny. He kept it out in the open, and when he would walk past it and thought no one was looking, he would pet it. Big old tough guy petting a little stuffed bunny in adorable secrecy. It was an ongoing family joke. Anyways, he committed suicide and we all went to the house to deal with the police and me and everything. We stayed in the house that night, and it had an overall creepy vibe because of what had happened. We were all naturally upset and struggling and doing dumb things to try to make ourselves laugh to try to deal with it. And we realized the bunny has been moving. Like it would be on the dining table, and then we would see it in the den an hour later. I thought someone was doing it as a joke, but everyone swore they wouldn't do that, and we never caught anyone doing it. I kept an eye on that bunny the entire week. Never saw anyone touch it, but it would still be moved. I think Grandad was playing jokes on us. Not the most convincing or scary story, but I like it. His cell phone also called his landline. That was weird. Edit. Thank you guys for your funny additions to this story. Grandpa is in Valhalla with the bunny and the bunny might have actually killed him, or the bunny had clues to treasures, or I stole the bunny myself. You guys always know how to lighten these things up. I love it. Making toast late one night facing the kitchen bench eating for a good 5-10 minutes. Cleaned up and turned around, and every single cupboard door and cutlery drawer were open. They were all closed when I went into the kitchen, and there was no way anyone could have snuck in and done it, because I was home alone. I also didn't hear them open in the time I was there. Scared the shit out of me, so I froze, let it register for a few seconds, then calmly closed everything, and went back to my room to hide until daylight. One of a few weird things to happen growing up. Another time, my brother kept having chronic nightmares for weeks to the point where he didn't want to sleep in his bed anymore. They were recurring dreams of an old woman who would always be shrouded in shadow and try get at my brother. One night I decided to sleep in that bed and had one of the freakiest dreams I've ever had. The woman my brother had been having nightmares about slid up through the gap between the wall and the bed and was trying to grab and pull me off the bed. Woke up sweating and yelling. It was after this that my mother decided to look into it. The nightmares started a week or so after buying the mattress secondhand, and my mother found out that one of the previous owners was an old woman who had apparently died on the mattress. Safe to say we get the duck out of the house, because that shit was way too spooky for my family. We should have burnt it. I was very anxious in the 24 hours prior to my brother's death, and there was no reason I should have felt that way. I had the sudden urge to call my father at around noon on June 30th of last year. I was super anxious and just really wanted to talk to him for some reason. I knew he was at work and on his lunch break, though, so I figured I would let him enjoy his break and call him later when he got off. My sister called about an hour later and said he had died. He parked his work truck, turned it off and just died. Massive heart attack. He was just gone. I wish I would have called. Maybe I could have said that I loved him before he died. Always make the phone call. Dude, I have a similar story. Also, I'm really sorry that happened to you. I live in a city 2 hours away from my family. My grandma, dad's mum, was in hospital dying of bowel cancer. I didn't know how bad it was in terms how exactly long she had. I woke up at the exact time she died, 2 a.m., with the worst pain I have ever felt in my life radiating from my stomach. It lasted about 20 minutes. I woke up in the morning, 9 a.m., to a text from my mum asking me to call her. I immediately knew what had happened. When I called my mum, she told me she'd had a dream at the exact same time, 2 a.m., in which my nan was wearing all white, looking really chill and happy, laughing, saying it's okay, I'm alright, everything will be okay. Still gives me the heebie-jeebies. Similar thing with me. My aunt-in-law's mother was in the hospital, and one night at 3 a.m. my grandaunt randomly said, I've a feeling that woman's gone now, at exactly the time she died to the minute. When I was a child, 10 years old, we lived on the north shore of the Shuswap Lake in BC. It was, then, very rural with a population of 400 spread out over 10 miles of beachfront with farms up in the hills. No town, just a store, a post office and an old Indian trail that wound through the forest for perhaps a half mile near where I lived. We played on the trail all the time. One afternoon, my family, mother, father, brother, myself and a friend went for a walk along the trail. My friend and I ran ahead at one point, out of sight of everyone. We stopped and were looking around, and off in the forest was a man, slumped over a fallen, rotting log with chickens pecking around him. I can still feel, and I'm talking 50 years in my past, the adrenaline blasting up my back as a figure lifted its head and looked at us with empty pecked out eyes. We screamed as both of us saw it and ran back to the adults. When my parents came to the spot with us, only the rotting log was there. To this day, I would not dare walk that path by myself. Somewhere out in the mountains near Mammoth, California, as a kid, my dad, myself, and a few family friends were out gazing at the stars. Being as I was from LA, I think it was the first time I'd ever seen the stars without light pollution, so I was fascinated. I pointed out to a cluster of 3 stars and said, hey look, it's Orion's belt. My father corrected me and showed me that Orion's belt was elsewhere, so I asked, well, what constellation is that then? And pointed back to the one from before. He conceded that it did look very similar to Orion's belt, but that he couldn't tell what it actually was. A little while later, what appeared to be the middle star of the 3 started moving quickly. It zigzagged through the sky for several seconds before its brightness intensified, and then just like that it disappeared. To this day the only thing I can think of that it could possibly be was some kind of experimental drone, but this was in the early 90s, and I'm not sure drones existed back then. And if it was a drone, it must have been a damned advanced one, because it stood still for long enough that myself and several adults nearby all thought it was a star. Anyway, kinda boring story I guess, but that's the only thing I've ever seen in my life that I really can't explain scientifically. Not me, but my stepfather's best friend, call him Jim, has supposedly been experiencing paranormal activity since he was a teenager. He's a court reporter. Stepdad was a speechwriter. Very skeptical and stoic guys. There were countless stories. They got on an elevator full of people in downtown Atlanta, stopped at a floor that was all kinds of wrong. 1940s decor, abandoned, dusty. Then the elevator went back down and opened on the opposite side of the building. Jim's dog died. A week later the stereo turned on by itself and started playing a song Jim loved to play for his pet. No CD inside. It had snowed the night before and there were paw prints in the backyard leading to the house, but none near the gate. He frequently finds giant piles of coins under his pillow. He lived in London for a time, thinking he'd escaped the spirit, which had begun to scratch him hard on his arms and legs. After 6 months he found a little pile of pennies in his bed, even though he hadn't been carrying American coinage. I personally witnessed one strange event while Jim was around. Was walking down the stairs and felt something whip past my head and heard it hit the wall. Looked down and saw a quarter dated 1948. I thought my sister was messing with me, but she was down at the lake with everyone else. Probably too late to get noticed, but it's a good story. I used to work as a 911 operator in a relatively large metro area. One night at about 3 AM or so I answered a call from an elderly lady who said she didn't feel good. I tried to get more info about what was wrong: chest pain, trouble breathing, headache, is she diabetic, etc. I got her address and phone number. She said no one else was home, but the door was unlocked, so they could go in. No matter what else I asked about what was wrong, all she would say is, I don't feel good, can you please send someone to help me? After a few minimum she said, I'm gonna put the phone down for a minute, I need to go to the bathroom. I tried to get her to stay on the line with me, told her she can do whatever she needs to get ready, but I'd like to be able to stay in contact in case there's a problem. She said, I'm gonna put the phone down, I'll just be a minute. A couple minimum passed, then the fire department called on scene, so I just disconnected and didn't think much about it. Told them the patient advised front door is unlocked and she was in the bathroom. A couple more minimum and one of the firefighters called over the air with a weird tone and said fire alarm, which is how they addressed dispatch. How exactly was this call received? I told them call was first party from the patient's home phone approximate 8 minutes ago. He didn't respond over the air, but called the desk from his cell phone, which usually only happens when something weird is going on that they don't want broadcasted, since anyone can listen to the radios. On the phone he said, are you sure this wasn't a third party call from a family member or something? I said negative. Caller advised I don't feel good and said no one else was home, so to the best of my knowledge, the caller is the patient. Have you made contact? He said yay, she was in the bathroom like you said, but she's been dead for about 12 hours. Cold to the touch, fully livid, full rigor, we are gonna need a deputy out here. Afterwards we pulled the tapes of the radio and phone calls and checked the timestamps, address, phone number, and went over everything a few times to see if I missed something. I called them back in the morning after the shift to see if they had any more info, but they were just as weirded out as we were. The phone was in the living room and the patient was in the bedroom, but the call was definitely from that phone. Still have no idea what the most likely explanation is. TLDR, got a 911 call from a dead woman because she didn't feel good. I guess this qualifies. When I was in 5th grade, I was walking under a portion of my school's covered walkways. It was raining but not heavy. I was walking in a straight line and someone yelled ball to my right, so I turned my head, but kept walking forward. When the excitement of a ball possibly coming towards me wore off, I remembered there was a pole nearby and stopped in my tracks to make sure I didn't hit it. I looked around and realized the pole was behind me. My wet footprints were leading up to the pole and leading away from the pole. Somehow, I had walked in the same path the pole was on, but didn't hit the pole. Not exactly too spooky for me, but still the most supernatural. You should know that I consider myself to be a very rational person. I'm not superstitious, and I don't believe in psychic powers or the supernatural. My best friend, Travis, and I used to play guitars together almost every day. That's not important now, but it will be later. One day we decided to go to the beach with our girlfriends and take some mushrooms. After a little while, when the mushrooms were kicking in, Travis said that he wanted to wander off alone, so I stayed with our girlfriends. We all had a great time. As the sun began to set, Travis' girlfriend asked me, "Where's Travis?" None of us knew where he was, but I could hear him playing the guitar, so I suggested that we just follow the sound of the music until we got to him. The girls told me that I must have really good hearing because they couldn't hear anything. I said, "Well, I can definitely hear it, so just follow me." Now here's the strange part. I followed the sound for several minutes into the forest and went directly to him, but when we reached him, he did not have a guitar, and I realized that we had left our guitars at home. I still have no idea how that happened. I lived in a haunted house with 3 roommates. They lived there for a couple of weeks before I did, and swore up and down that a young woman was haunting the house. One of them said they had some incense manually extinguished when they weren't home. Another one said they were feeling around in the dark looking for a light switch, and felt the hair on the top of someone's head. Someone that wasn't there when the light came on. I, being a good and proper atheist, and knowing my roommates were kinda podheads, thought it was all bollocks, and that they were paranoid. A month or so after I moved in, I was laying in bed when I heard a girl crying in the hallway. 2 of my roommates were girls, so I got up to do the requisite investigating and consoling. I opened my door to see who it was, only to discover that I was the only person home at that time. I'm still not a major believer in the supernatural, but I won't rule anything out now. So much paranormal shit happened to me when I was a kid. One that has always stuck was when I was about 3 or 4 years old. Back then I used to randomly wake up in the middle of the night really often for no known reason. I was still sleeping in my parents' bed at the time, so I would just lay in bed and look around. I swear, every fucking time I'd look at the doorway to the living room, I would see 2 really tall figures standing there. They looked like the old farm couple in that one painting, except they had hollow eyes and they were thinner. They never really didn't do anything but stare back at me at first. One night was especially weird. I woke up as usual and saw them standing there right in front of the doorway again. Only this time something felt a bit more off than usual. The ceiling fan was on high and the blades were going so fast that the entire fixture was moving back and forth. I look back at the figures and they have some really dark, creepy grins on their faces. I got scared and buried myself in the blankets, hoping they'd go away. Then all I heard was the ceiling fan spinning even faster. Somehow, the beads at the end of the switches were tapping against the glass light cover furiously. I peeked up out of my covers and the 2 figures were right next to the bed standing right over me with their ugly smiles. I screamed bloody murder and the glass cover on the light came off and shattered on the ground. My dad jumped out of bed immediately and turned on the light to see what happened, but the 2 figures were gone already. I was crying hysterically and took my mom a long time to calm me down. So much other stuff went on while I lived there. That was the worst house I ever lived in. My wife and I were getting dinner on the table. Our 4-year-old son was in the adjoining room and said, "Hey, that's the job I had in my last life." He's looking at the TV and there is a man shaping metal over a fire. We were shocked because we had never discussed reincarnation with him or even with each other in his presence. We're atheists. I tried to get him to elaborate, but he just went back to what he was doing like he never said it. When I was 3 to 4, I was sitting on the floor of our kitchen playing while my parents cooked. I suddenly stopped and said I was a sunshine girl that smoked flowers. Oh, yeah. When they were toddlers, both of my kids told me about their previous selves. My daughter complained about how the elders used to make her cover up her entire body with long dark robes, but now people walk around almost naked, and it's much better. My son told me that the last time he was stuck under thick ice and couldn't get out, and then he died and came to me. Both times the kids immediately returned their attention to the mundane task at hand. I'm sure there's a logical explanation in the mystery, that is the non-linear toddler mind, but when they blurt stuff like that out, it can give you chills. During most of my life my mother ran a daycare. One of the kids was named Dylan. Dylan was really smart and somewhat rebellious, but not a jerk kid. We all liked him, but he was always a bit off. So one day he's sitting at the kitchen table eating his snacks. The other kids were done, and it was just him and my mom. He had some carrots left, but was out of juice. My mom asked him if he wanted more. His response freaks us out today, almost 20 years later. Keep in mind, he was something like 7 when this happened. I was visiting and making a sandwich and this shit happened. Well, miss, I'd prefer some whiskey, if you wouldn't mind obliging me. What? Whiskey? No. With a laugh. Begging your pardon, miss, but it's been a long day. I've come a long way. I'm going to turn in soon, and I'm not here to cause any trouble. I've heard you have whiskey, and I'm more than happy to pay for it. I'm having a good week. This made no sense. This was a little kid. Our family certainly had no whiskey in the house. We were teetotalers. His parents rarely let him watch TV, let alone old-timey westerns. But here he was, accent and all, sounding like Jeff Bridges in True Grit. My mom, though, just reacted. No, Dylan, no whiskey for you. Orange juice. She set down a sippy cup of the orange goodness. Ma'am, that's just not going to cut it. I came all the way down from Wyoming, and by tarnation I'm a man who wants some whiskey. If you can't provide it, then I'll find someone who can. He stood up, made for the front door, and got it open before my mom grabbed him. Presto, he was back to normal. Can I have some juice? Nothing he did during this time was him. His body language was different, his voice was way lower, and he was totally into what he was doing. It happened a few times after that. At some point, later, when I wasn't there, my mom asked him who he was. He gave a name that was something along the lines of Thomas Jeremy Armstrong. She got really into it and started asking about his life. He was apparently lumber prospector and trader who lived his later years somewhere north of Sacramento. We were in Washington state and had a wife who died from a fever. This kid was in the 1st grade. My mom then asked when he was born and he said December 14th, 1856. It was a Sunday. Sure enough, it was a ducking Sunday. This kinda stuff has always held a mild fascination for me, but this kid was something else. I have no idea how this works, but it's freaky to this day. I heard my 2-year-old daughter talking in her room in the middle of the night. I went in and asked her what she was doing. She said, talking to Samantha. She's on the ceiling. My wife had miscarried a few months prior. It was a girl. We were going to name her Samantha. If you like what I'm doing, consider subscribing to Reddit Thief for more Reddit TTS. Have a nice day.